this morning. What a great crowd, too. I'm surprised at the number of people in the room. So my name is Sean Bowen. I'm Agricultural Composting Coordinator at Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources. Before I begin, one of the things in the panel that stood out to me when Jenny had said that farmers are not very well respected. And I think that is a hell of a statement. But it should make an impression on all of us, really, because without farmers, we don't eat. There's a lot of things that we don't do. So I think we all kind of need to take a good hard look at how well we respect farms. And at MDAR, our job is to support farms that are environmentally sustainable and economically efficient. There's many different definitions of sustainability. Money is one, environment is one, but there's many different definitions of it. The other thing that I wanted to point out with food waste diversion, I'll be talking about composting, but animal feed is a great way to get rid of food scraps. There are regulations, there are MDAR regulations based upon the type of animal and the type of food that it's being fed. So if you're going to feed animals, check with our Division of Animal Health on that. Can be a win-win for farms and waste disposal. Might smell, might attract rodents, but I've always said that hog farming is a good cover scent for composting. So at MDAR, we encourage farms to compost. Crop farms, we encourage to produce compost and apply it to their soil. It improves the soil tilth, water holding capacity, and it adds nutrients and micronutrients. It's generally not that high in NPK, depending upon what's in it. And livestock farms, we encourage them to compost as part of nutrient management. Finished compost is more stable than manure. There's no odors, less leaching, it's lighter, it's easier to handle and spread. Sometimes composting can really help farms. If it's done well, if it's done in controlled conditions, it produces a valuable soil amendment that can really, as I said, improve soil health. And sometimes it doesn't help. If it's not done well, it produces your neighbors. Nobody wants to get on the front page of a newspaper. This was actually my hometown newspaper in Rhode Island. It was a farm that had been composting not well, and they were shut down, and nobody wants that. That's not good. One of my favorite sayings is that composting done well is beneficial or at least benign to the environment. Composting done poorly is bad for the environment. So just because it's under the label of composting doesn't mean it's done right. Some things are easy to compost. Leaves, horse manure, pretty hard to mess that up. I've seen it messed up, but it's pretty hard to mess it up. Some things are harder to compost. Food waste can be very tricky to compost. Other things like cranberries. Cranberries are the anomaly of the composting world. Seafood can be a tricky thing. Post-consumer food waste can be a very difficult thing. And it requires resources. And those resources take many forms. It's not just money, it's space, setbacks. As Mary was saying, Cape Cod has pretty tight setbacks. Equipment, carbon is a huge resource that has to be taken into account. If you don't have carbon on site, you have no business taking in post-consumer food waste. Knowledge is a huge resource. And most importantly, for farms especially, it's time. During the harvest season, there's not many farmers that aren't busy. So to add another job on top of that can be very taxing. So regulation for composting in Massachusetts, and I'm talking about bringing organic material from off-site for the purpose of composting. Generally speaking, it's regulated by Mass DEP under their solid waste regulations. They have a general permit for composting. John, correct me if I say anything out of turn, but so one of the clauses in that regulation, the solid waste reg, allows for composting on an agricultural unit, which is where our program, our MDAR program, comes in. We have established a registration process so that farms can register with us and enjoy a conditional exemption from Mass DEP's regulation. Doesn't mean they're exempt from being regulated. It means that they have opted to be regulated by MDAR rather than Mass DEP. And so either a Mass DEP or an MDAR registration would allow you to bring organic material from offsite for the purpose of composting. At MDAR, we have an agricultural composting improvement program, a grant program, which provides funding to our registered farms and those which are exempt because they don't bring material from offsite. It provides funding for equipment and projects like screeners, spreaders, mixers, windrow turners, compost pads, and improved technology systems. We've funded in-vessel composters. We've funded static aerated systems. It's been a fairly popular program. Doesn't get a lot of funding. We get about $185,000 per year. We also just recently, hot off the presses, came up with a revised guide to agricultural composting. I have some hard copies in the car. It's online. If you Google MDAR composting, you'll come up with our webpage. It's in PDF form there. As I said, I have some hard copies in the car. I'm proud of it anyway. It's updated. The last revision, I think, was 15 years ago, perhaps. So there's a lot of new material in there. Hopefully, you'll find it helpful. And we have our own set of regulations, MDAR regulations 330 CMR 25, which you'll again find on our webpage. We don't have, so when a farm registers with us, we have some carrots, but we don't have a lot of sticks with which to beat non-compliant composters. Really, the only thing that we can do with a non-compliant composter is cut ties with them and revoke their registration, in which case they would be subject to DEP. We don't like to do this. We have done it. My position is located within the Division of Technical Assistance, and I do my darndest to regulate through technical assistance. I conduct site visits. I have a state vehicle. I go anywhere from Barnstable County to Berkshire County. And I have the best job in the world going farm to farm and helping people compost. So we really try to keep people in the program. If things aren't going right, we have a grant program to try and help things along the way. And as I said, a lot more information, including an application for registration and a guide to ag composting. You can find that on our website. And I think I have do I have my email address? My email address and my phone number is there. I'm happy to answer any questions. I'll be around for a little while after. I have a stack of business cards. I'm happy to give them out if anybody would like to contact me. And thank you very much. Yes.
You were saying it's a struggle with post-consumer food waste?
Okay.
What do you mean?
So, I mean, it's a very volatile material that, if not composted properly, will cause a public nuisance. So, there are ways to compost it properly. But composting post-consumer food waste, as distinguished from horse manure. So we have mandatory setbacks in our regulation, minimum of 100 feet from a property line. If you're composting post-consumer food waste and there's a house right on the other side of that property line, likely 100 feet is not nearly enough. Depending upon the volumes, depending upon the method of composting, if you're using a static aerated or an in-vessel system, these things may have a bearing on setbacks and how much of a problem it could cause. I've seen farms do food waste composting very well. I've also seen post-consumer food waste. I've seen it, not just post-consumer. I've seen like grocery store waste, food waste composting, give good farms a bad name. Nobody wants to end up on the front page of the Boston Globe. But there's been a lot of encroachment on farms now with residential development. I think people are, it's evolutionary programmed into our head to know what rotten food smells like, so that we have an aversion to it. And I think evolutionarily it's great. There are ways to manage compost so that it doesn't cause a public nuisance. May still have an odor, but there are ways to manage it. Composting is aerobic and controlled. If it becomes anaerobic and uncontrolled, we got problems. That can be odor, it can be fire, can be any number of things. Yes?
When you talk about controlling odors in an anaerobic process on a small farm with housing encroachment, when you're in Massachusetts specifically, or being just in this area, what kind of method do you normally see that works the best? Is it a container? Is it underground? Windrows seem like not the best if you're in small scale.
Windrows can be tricky. Windrows can be tricky. If you don't have good setbacks, windrows can be tricky. Even with windrows, there are ways to develop recipes properly, including reduced bulk densities, reducing moisture, so that you can better control the process. Functioning on a stable pad so that there's no ruts, and there's a barrier between the substrate and the organic material. Once the organic material gets into the substrate, it kind of stays there, and it's hard to get out, and you get ruts. So there are best practices that can be done, even with windrows, but you don't need to have a 12-foot tall windrow. You can have a 4-foot tall windrow, and you can cap it with carbon. So there are methods that you can do to mitigate odors and reduce the chances that there'll be a nuisance.
I guess I was wondering if you see, like on the island, I don't know if Michigan has a huge tumbler compost container.
That came from just north of Boston.
Every
Yep.
farm has giant piles. Matt, the farm where I clean, has big piles. You have to turn them. I've also seen underground composting.
So if it's underground, it's probably not aerobic. If it's buried waste, probably. I'm judging, but I haven't seen it. But composting is an aerobic process. It's not a perfect system. Sometimes intended composting goes anaerobic, or you get pockets of anaerobic activity, depending on the methods. But if you have a windrow turner, you can uniformly distribute the moisture and the nutrients and break up balls and more uniformly distribute the nutrients in that to reduce the chances of it going anaerobic. Anaerobic is slow and stinky and smelly and gross. Aerobic may be smelly, but it's controllable. Any other questions?
Any other questions? All right, Sean, thank you.
I'll be around for a bit if anybody has any questions. Thanks.